books about books. That was kind of the theme for my reading at the start of 2025, and it slowly morphed into kind of nature-themed writing. Yeah, come along as I share some recaps on thoughts on the books that I've read so far in 2025. If you're new here, my name is Carrie Ann, and this video is kind of Matilda and Miss Honey inspired. Miss Honey is literally just my style inspiration in general. But yeah, later on I want to share a special doll of mine that I think resembles actually like a young Matilda, at least in the movie, like the toddler version of Matilda. And but more importantly, I'm going to be sharing about books that I've been reading and my thoughts on them, and we're just going to pretend like we're Miss Honey and, you know, talking over our favorite books with little Matilda. So the first book that I was reading this year in January was The Long Winter by Laura Ingalls Wilder. I think you can guess why I was reading that book, and it's because it was the middle of winter. And I was just looking for something kind of atmospheric and interesting. It's obviously an easy read. It's, you know, a book written still for the children age category. But it was very enjoyable to just learn about the historical perspective and experience of settlers during winter, and it was particularly a harsh one, which is why it's called The Long Winter. And yeah, during and after reading this, I was so thankful every time I flicked on my lights or my central air turned on and blew hot air throughout my house, when I turned my oven on and I could just bake whatever I wanted with white flour. Because in this story, they ended up having to live off coarse, ground, whole wheat bread alone. That's all they were able to eat. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For like 6 weeks or more at the end of the winter time, because the train wasn't able to make it to their settlement with all of the deep snow that had fallen. And yeah, they were like having to braid and twist stalks of straw hay together in order to make fuel to burn in their fires, because they also ran out of coal and the train wasn't able to bring in coal. Like, it was just crazy. Like, I'm so thankful for the people who endured those harder conditions, and I'm so thankful for our modern comforts. The second book I read in 2025 was called Hunt Gather Parent. I read this book because I was kind of struggling with the phase of parenting I was entering now that my daughter was becoming a more capable and articulate person. The book discusses parenting from different areas in the world, ones that are still pretty indigenous or traditional to their place. It encourages including your toddler as a mini and capable person in daily life tasks, disciplining through story and causing them to think. And it also shares some other interesting stories just about parenting around the world. It's an interesting read. Just was curious about getting kind of a different perspective, and yeah, it might be helpful to somebody out there. So the third book that I read this year is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. I have always loved the film adaptation of Stardust ever since I first saw it, as I was probably a 10-year-old girl, something like that. But I had never read the book. It just wasn't in our house, and after reading that kind of parenting book, I was looking for something a bit more whimsical and fun to read. So I decided to pull my Stardust book off the shelf. Admittedly, this is a time where I appreciate the film over the novel. But I do understand that, of course, there would be no film if there wasn't first the novel. I just think that they made some really good choices and small changes in the film that elevated it, but from the casting, the score, and chemistry between the two leads. follows Tristan, this young man who lives in the town of Wall, and he eventually ventures over this wall that has divided his town from this place beyond the wall for years and years, because he wants to retrieve a fallen star for his crush. It's a crush, let's be real. Crush Victoria. But however, the star is more human than he expects. So, but Stardust, read the book, but go watch the movie. It's a really fun fantasy film. Another book that I read during winter is Pilgrim's Progress. So I wanted to read this because it's kind of like classic religious literature, and I had not read it, so I felt kind of like there was a hole in my reading. And because I also enjoy Little Women, the novel, but didn't understand any of the references to Pilgrim's Progress that she makes in the story. And yeah, I really encourage, if you are, religious yourself, to read it, because it's a beautiful story, and it does take a slower read to digest it properly. Like, you don't just want to like sit there and read it all at once. At least I didn't. But yeah, it helps to bring some of the mythical and tangible elements of the Christian faith into understanding by the way of story. So it's kind of like a Charlotte Mason-esque take on a Christian's journey, like bringing struggles that we might face as real, characters that you can talk to, and like, how does that conversation go? Just a sec, sweetie. As Pilgrim is on his journey to the Celestial City, and he encounters many characters along the way that we all might be able to relate to. So a book I read by listening to the audiobook was The Gentle Art of Swedish Death Cleaning. Sounds very cheerful, I know. It was still wintertime, and winter feels like a clean slate. The snow, the white, the freezing cold that kills all the terrible bugs. It makes me want to clear out and set my house in order. So this book explains Swedish death cleaning, which is an extreme process of decluttering to prepare your state in case of your death. So practical, effective, encouraging. And well, I'm still, I'd say, like in the phase where I'm still kind of building up my home. I definitely want to always keep myself in check that I'm not adding too many extraneous or unnecessary items to it, or just, constantly, checking my items, making sure that I'm still loving them, tending for them, or, looking for a new home for them if they do not serve me any longer. But also when I'm acquiring new items, that it is truly things with a timeless taste, or that I really see myself loving and enjoying for a long time. A big goal read for me this year was the first volume of Charlotte Mason's series called Home Education. And I was so thankful because I put in the request to my local library if they would be willing to purchase the series, the whole volume series of Charlotte Mason work, because they had some like auxiliary works, people writing about Charlotte Mason's methods or referencing Charlotte Mason, but they didn't have the volumes themselves. And I think, you sometimes want to go to the source, and I just asked and recommended that it would be a really great resource to have in the library, and he was gracious enough to agree and purchased it. And I really hope that it's been a great resource to other people in my community now that it's a part of our local library. But yeah, it was her first and foundational exploration into the education of young children, and how home life should be structured, and how to see children as whole persons who have the innate ability to learn bound up in their creation. And we, as their parents or educators, just have to know how to facilitate the learning that they're already inspired to do. And so, yeah, and her main theory in all of her work is how good books and the good books are the life-shaping tool, because they provide living ideas, which are the things that inspire us to live the good life. And so admittedly, it's dense and it's tough to get through at times, but it's great for any Christian mother or just home educating mother. And yeah, I will talk a bit later on about how I also read the second one so far this year. And maybe my goal will be to also tackle the third one. 3 in 1 year. Sounds fair. My daughter's still young, so I have some time to build up my theory. So a really fun book series that I also read this year is called Pages and Co. And they all kind of go Tilly and blah, blah, blah. There's like Tilly and the Book Wanderers, Tilly and the Lost Fairy Tales, Tilly and the Map of Stories. There's also a couple other books, but kind of the first 3 form, I'd say, like the initial trilogy story. And yeah, these are like, they're middle school novels, and I came across them. I think I saw them in like a marketplace listing, and I was like, oh, what are these books? And I looked them up, and I just was kind of fascinated by this storyline. Like, you know, stories are stories for all ages, no matter what level they're written for. And yeah, I was intrigued by them because they featured Anne of Green Gables and Alice from Wonderland. If you know, you know. And so yeah, the books follows our main character, Tilly Pages, who lives with her grandparents in a bookstore. How cool is that? Well, like, they have the bookstore, and I think they live like on the upper level above the bookstore, but who wouldn't love that? And yeah, her life takes a turn when Anne Shirley herself shows up across from her among the bookshelves. She doesn't know it yet, but Tilly is what they call a book wanderer, someone capable of traveling inside stories because of their immense capacity for imagination. Such a fun concept. So the novels follow her adventures into the land of story, and it is honestly a whimsical and lovely series. It really touches on the power of story, our imagination, family ties, family units, and the legacy of story through time. Like how the things that were written hundreds, thousands of years ago, those stories are still impacting people today. And allowing ourselves into those stories to fully immerse ourselves or let them take us captive. You know, we have to be careful about the books and things that we read because they are giving us ideas. But yeah, sometimes there are things that stories that we should let like take hold of us and form us and be willing to live there in our minds in some of these beautiful, magical environments that have been created, and to converse with characters that we love and are inspired by. And that's like one of my whole inspirations behind starting these videos on this channel was, you know, I've so loved or come to love these literary characters, and the moments of these stories, the worlds that they live in, they influence me, they live in my mind, and I want to bring that into my own reality. And that's what these vlogs and videos are supposed to be, like bridging the gap between what just lived in my imagination and what I can actually partake in as a person and what I can share with other people. And yeah, like that is story, and that is the power of it. And it's, yeah, well, I'm really excited to be making these videos just because it's something I've been passionate about, and yeah, I'm just hoping it brings some new perspective or interest to these stories that I really love. I'm going to briefly mention the next book that I read, which was Once Upon a Tome by Oliver Darkshire. First name's Oliver. This book I read in between like the Pages & Co series. Like I had read the first kind of Pages & Co, then I read this book, and then the other Pages & Co. And it's a biography from someone who worked in like the oldest antiquarian and rare bookshop in England. And he's a brilliant writer, and the book challenged my vocabulary skills. Like that is how, yeah, that's just how diverse and interesting the language he uses in the biography is. And he's hilarious. The book is curious and fascinating, and it's just so interesting to get a more kind of biographical look at book selling, old books, working in a bookstore. I highly recommend, if you are a bibliophile, if you like reading, if you love bookstores, it's just a really unique read. So I'm gonna try to keep this segment short, but I do, one of the joys of making these videos was I wanted to be able to share my beautiful dolls with those of you who are interested. I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think that they're really fun and special, and especially in line with, you know, Matilda and Miss Honey. You know, there's that kind of pivotal part in the film where Matilda wants to retrieve Miss Honey's doll. Like, that Mrs. Trunchbull kept Mrs. Honey's doll from her is terrible. And this doll I'm going to share, I think kind of, like I said, looks like a little young Matilda, or even kind of like Lissy doll, like Miss Honey's doll, even though she's not a porcelain doll. But yeah, she's a recent addition to my small, I say collection, but like I have a small collection. It's like under 10 dolls. She is a 1984 Engel-Puppen, if you can see her cute little, it means in German angel dolls. Isn't that sweet? Engel-Puppen doll from 1984. So she is older than even the OG American Girls, which I think is really cool. She has it stamped on the back of her neck. She has these really nice, that kind of, I think, even amber colored eye that early Samantha's are known for. And she does unfortunately have a damaged eye, which I tried to fix. After this video, I'm going to be sharing a video of me talking about like unboxing her and reviving her a bit, because when I got her, her hair was in really bad shape and her eye was in much worse condition. So I had to, I tried to fix it up a bit, and thankfully I was able to. And she just has a really darling little face, but she's also a bigger doll compared to like American Girl size. She's a couple inches taller, but also just like bigger. Like her head is and body are physically bigger than American Girls. But yeah, I could imagine a doll like this kind of being Miss Honey's Lissy doll and Lissy doll. I'm not quite sure how you say it. Lissy? I think it's supposed to be short for Felicity, so Lissy. And I just really love that she's, you know, a made in Germany doll from 1984. And yeah, she's, I think, a unique addition to my collection. And I hope you enjoyed getting to see her. And like I said, I'll be posting another video about cleaning her up in a bit. I also read the second volume of Charlotte Mason's work called Parents and Children. Like I would have mentioned before, I don't own this series. I was able to borrow it from the library. But yeah, this second volume goes more in depth into the parent-child relationship, and again formulating home life to everyone's advantage, particularly to the atmosphere, discipline, and life of education. And this was also dense, both her books dense to get through, but very practical. And the most encouraging point of the book is her look at habitual thoughts, just thoughts in general. You know, her tagline is basically living ideas. And I'm going to talk a bit later about how the story, The Secret Garden, I'll talk a bit later how the novel The Secret Garden is basically the embodiment of living ideas and Charlotte Mason's thoughts about living ideas. And yeah, living ideas produce thoughts, and thoughts are not, they're not just ethereal, insubstantial things. This is Charlotte Mason's point. And what she says is that we actually have the ability to change. The very nature of us, we can change, because thoughts are not merely abstract whims, but make trails in our brains. Like, think like, you know, a river, a creek, you know, first just a stream of water, you know, starts trickling in a certain direction. And the more that that stream of water keeps moving down that path, it erodes it further and further and becomes a deeper and deeper trench. But if you build a new trench for the water to run down, it will run down the new trench. These trails can either be reinforced or destructed and rebuilt into something better. So, you know, if we have these negative thoughts, these death-filled thoughts, pretty much, if they're not living ideas, you know, the hope that Charlotte Mason gives us in this volume is that, well, you are not bound to that. You are not stuck remaining with these weighted, stone-laden thoughts. You can create new paths, you can create new trails, and you can recreate the very nature of your being by giving it new ideas and habitually thinking on those things and creating a life filled with good living ideas. And so it was really encouraging and inspiring to hear that, because I know I've struggled with the thought that, oh, you feel like the world presents you more examples of people don't change than it does of the opposite. And, you know, like that she's actually bringing a scientific even explanation about, like, your neurons, like thoughts are wiring paths in your neurons. They're making connections, and the more you think that thought, you know, it keeps shooting. The more you do that action, it keeps shooting down this one chain that you made. But you are in fact able to make new chains and reinforce those ones instead, and leave these old ones to rot, basically. And yeah, it's encouraging to hear as an adult, and it's also inspiring to know that, like, those, like, that is your goal as a parent, is to create the right ditches, the right streams in your child's mind, that, like, they don't even have to question or think about what is best. They just know, and their brain, their body, their soul just is wired to run down the path of life instead of the path of death. So dense, but I really encourage it for any parent. So the next book I read was The Secret Book of Flora Lee. This book was a recommendation by the creator Darling Desi, and she's by far my favorite creator here on YouTube. But I devoured this book because it was just so compelling and beautiful. It follows the main character Hazel through two parts of her life. First is in the 1940s, when she was an evacuee from London, and she's sent to the English countryside. And the second part is when she's an adult in the 1960s, and some things are coming to light in her life that had previously happened in the 1940s. And I want to leave most of it a surprise because it's just so good. And I'm just gonna list, like, after I finish this book, you know those books that you're just haunted by? There was just different, like, carousel memories of my mind that, you know, flicked through it that felt like the essence of this book. So the song Safe and Sound by Taylor Swift, the novel and film A Bridge to Terabithia, Tuck Everlasting for the capturing of young love, Miss Lavender's Cottage from Anne of Avonlea, Atonement's green dress scene, and overall kind of war vibes, because there is the portion set in during the World War, but also just the passion of Atonement. If you know, you know. And the film On Chesil Beach, which stars Saoirse Ronan. It's set in 1960s, and it's kind of in this English countryside town. It's a good film. I recommend watching the film, but it also is the vibe. But for the 1960s portion of the film and the adult version of Hazel, yeah, those are the vibes of this book, because I want to mainly leave it a surprise. A book I started reading in March, April-ish, and I'm still intermittently reading it because I'm reading it more like episodically, just kind of chapter by chapter when I want a bit of it, is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. And this book is a love letter to the world, and that's how Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, puts it. And it truly is, because I had first read this book actually during my environment major in university. This was about 4 years ago. I had to read the book so rushed before because it was by deadline. You know, we had to read a certain amount on the slide. Can you go take them on the slide? We had to read a certain amount by our next class so that we could discuss it and write about it and all that. And I also just wasn't kind of in the proper state of mind to appreciate the writing of what she was getting at. So yeah, the book takes you through the stages of braiding sweetgrass, which was a traditional indigenous practice. Each chapter, she's covering a different nature like thing. I'm saying this terribly. Let me just read my notes. It calls us to be better stewards of the gifts of the earth, to look at this world with more animacy, and improve our relationships overall. It is, yeah, like I said, it's great in bite-sized pieces. I've been enjoying reading a chapter outside. And yeah, if you're just looking to for some new and old perspective, that's the interesting thing that she brings to light with her indigenous teaching, is some of these older perspectives of how we used to see the world before pretty much postmodernism came about. And give it a read. Another very naturey type book that then I read was The Blue Castle by Emma Montgomery, and it's one of her few novels which focus solely on an adult female protagonist. Her name is Valency, and she lives in the Muskoka region of Ontario in a fictional town, but is obviously very inspired by real life when Montgomery visited the area. And so Valency is on the verge of becoming an old maid at 28, turning 29 in the early, I think it's probably actually set in the 1920s, and in her snob-nosed family. And after she visits a doctor because she's having some heart pains, she's told that she may not have much longer to live. So this new information emboldens Valency to do and say all the things that she dared not do before. And the novel follows her adventure into coming into herself, into love, and into life, honestly. And it's also a love letter to nature and features beautiful writing about the region that it's set in. Montgomery is just a beautiful lyrical writer overall. Yeah, she writes love letters to all of the regions that she writes about. And this is no different. And I devoured this novel. I highly recommend it. I'm gonna just read a short little excerpt here about with some of the nature writing. They didn't spend all their days on the island. They spent more than half of them wandering at will through the enchanted Muskoka country. Barney knew the woods as a book, and he taught their lore and craft to Valency. He could always find trail and haunt of the shy wood people. Valency learned the different fairy likenesses of the mosses, the charm and exquisiteness of woodland blossoms. She learned to know every bird at sight and mimic its call, though never so perfectly as Barney. She made friends with every kind of tree. She learned to paddle a canoe as well as Barney himself. She liked to be out in the rain, and she never caught cold. Sometimes they took a lunch with them and went berrying. Strawberries and blueberries, how pretty blueberries were. The dainty green of the unripe berries, the glossy pinks and scarlets of the half-ripes, the misty blue of the full matured. And Valency learned the real flavor of the strawberry in its highest perfection. A kind of just easy read, and something that I'd been meaning to get to because the book had been floating around on my shelf for a while, and I figured I was kind of like in between. But yeah, so it was The Tale of Castle Cottage, one of the Beatrix Potter mystery books by Susan Wittig Albert. And yeah, the book was floating around on my shelves and with the intention of reading it, and it was kind of like a lunch book. Like if a book was described as a meal, this book was like lunch, in the fact that it's not amazing, but it filled your appetite for kind of mystery and cozy cottage scenes and Beatrix Potter, if that makes sense. It's a nice little mystery book, and it was a fine way to wind down my day when I would just read it at the end of the day. The plot is that someone seems to be stealing from members of the township of... Sorry. They're stealing like building materials and other things. And the man who was accused of stealing ends up dead. And so questions arise as to what actually happened. Did he kill himself? Was he murdered? Was he actually the thief? And there's also a second storyline about a thievius rat gang that is also in town at the same time. So it's kind of quirky. The animals, there's like portions where the animals talk, and they're the ones trying to solve the rat mystery, and then the adults are trying to solve the adult mystery. So it was an okay read. The next book I read is Magic for Marigold by another Ella Montgomery book. This one follows Marigold from the time of her prolonged naming as a baby to her girlhood and the magic and adventures that evolve around her. I love anything by Ella Montgomery for her beautiful writing and descriptions of just everyday life. They're literally like epochs, you know, her novels. They don't follow, you know, strong plots necessarily, but just they follow the life of individual girls or women and what it was like living in that region and that time period. And it's a really cool thing to look into. And yeah, well, not as infamous as Anne, Marigold has her own story to explore and mature throughout, and I recommend it just for a pleasurable leisure read because anything by Ella Montgomery is good, especially in the warmer months if you're just sitting outside and looking for something enjoyable to read. The most recent book I read was The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, and I was so familiar with the story from the film, but yeah, it's, you know, classic children's literature, so I figured I'd better finally read it, and I'm really glad I did. And like I mentioned before, it kind of is the essence of living ideas, and basically that is contextualized through the garden itself, the living thing. These children who were ill and sick and contrary and grumpy for that matter, they are brought into a new type of being by a garden, by seeing things grow and come to life and blossom and flower and bloom and beauty, just witnessing beauty and partaking in it. And that's really, yeah, the essence of the novel. Even at the end, for Lord Craven himself, it's, can he regain living ideas instead of all of these sad, morbid, death-filled ones that he had? And yeah, it's a beautiful book and beautiful story. And a little secret sneak peek is that I will be sharing a Secret Garden inspired day in a little bit. And I look forward to sharing that. Bye-bye.